with boards having fiduciary duty and trying to save money, a lot of board members get on the board because they want to protect their own home values. They may not want to see money being spent irresponsibly, and that can sometimes go the wrong way. So shortcuts. Can you mention a shortcut that maybe boards try to go down that ends up costing them in the long run, or it's riskier than they realize? What have you seen?
Well, the and a shortcut would, in my mind, sort of imply something that that may be good, but you should not do. One of the shortcuts that I see boards taking is taking the cheapest contract. For example, that's a common misconception. You get what you pay for. Is really the apt phrase for that. The cheapest is not always the best, and actually the cheapest usually isn't the best. The board has to go beyond just the price and has to actually do their due diligence, and you need to for example, do a background search on the contractor, see how long they've been licensed, ask for references, ask for examples. If it's a building envelope or a roof issue, ask for references regarding other roofs that they have done. It's the boards, as you pointed out, they have a fiduciary duty to ensure that they're being prudent in their decisions, and digging up and turning over every stone that you can find on that particular vendor, or at least what's out in the marketplace, is it's not necessarily, it definitely isn't a shortcut, but if you bypass that, you may arguably be getting yourself into a bad contract. And if it's, and then when you look at, for example, the insurance issues, particularly workers' compensation, you have to talk with your insurance agent, have them review the declaration page and even the policy. You brought up earlier that insurance contracts are contracts, and actually just about every single case concerning interpretation of contracts in Florida is interpreting an insurance contract. Why? Because they're horrible. They are horrible, and they are confusing, and it's like you're jumping into a cyclone of words. So you need to have your attorneys review those types of matters, and you can't take shortcuts. I mean, I guess if I have to come to a bottom line, the bottom line is you can't take shortcuts. You have to do your due diligence. You have to show that all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and that if you made that decision, if it turns out to be the wrong decision, there's nothing wrong with making the wrong decision. It's making the wrong decision without being informed that's going to get you into trouble. And I know you've seen that with D&O claims. If you just pull the trigger without making sure that the gun is clean and without making sure that it's the right type of gun, then you're going to get in trouble.
No. A board trying to save $200 or $300 because they don't want to talk to their attorney, or because they don't want to spend any more time talking to whoever, getting a second, third, fourth opinion, and then it ends up biting them in the end. Or the biggest thing that is always a conversation with me is, well, we have one vendor who doesn't have workers' compensation and another one that does,
right,
and the one that doesn't is a lot cheaper. Yeah, workers' compensation is expensive. And guess who's going to bear that when somebody gets hurt?
Yep.
When they should have had coverage? The association is going to have a huge amount of exposure, especially if they're breaking the law or bringing people on that were supposed to be covered and they're not. These vendors can be viewed as uninsured subcontractors, and that can flow right up to the association.
Yeah.
You need to have that statutory coverage of workers' compensation coverage. And it's very interesting that you mentioned the interpretation of insurance contracts. The thing that, as soon as you start to learn about how these work, the craziest part is the actual coverage, 90% of the time, is in the exception to the exclusion.
Right.
So you have the whole document is exclusions. Where's the coverage? It's in except in this case. Oh, that's where the coverage is. This little piece in this document full of exclusions.
Oftentimes, when a client comes and asks for my opinion or your opinion, I always try to provide my opinion in the abundance of caution clause. Meaning, you come to me, I'm going to be thinking worst case scenario, because I'm thinking of your liability. I'm thinking of what happens if a catastrophic accident happens. What happens if a roofer falls off the 7th story roof and perishes? How often does that happen? Not very often, but when it does happen, If you don't have the proper things lined up and you don't have the contract and you don't have the insurance coverage, the association can be certainly crippled, And a penny saved in the beginning could cost you tens of thousands in the end.
Yeah.
So spend that penny to make sure you have that coverage in the event, for example, that something catastrophic happens. I mean, I had a community down in Tampa where a dump truck backed over and killed one of the employees. I mean, everything went haywire. Thankfully, there was proper coverages in place. Why? Because the association did their due diligence to make sure the contractor was covered at the front door.
Yeah.
No one could have anticipated the accident, but it's the unanticipated stuff that catches you by surprise and hurts you.
Yeah.
That's what your experts are used for on the front end.
Yeah. I think that is kind of the biggest risk of board members who may be on a board for 2 or 3 years. It's not usually a long-term position. A lot of them pray when they get on the board it's not going to be a long-term
Right.
position.
Right.
But it's hard to see that far, and it's hard to see all the things that can happen. And they don't love the negativity sometimes of having the viewpoint of envisioning the worst case scenario so we can build the contract to protect the association,
Right.
the association and owners from that worst case scenario. Just last year, we had 2 people fall off a 5-story building. They survived, but they were terribly injured.
Terribly.
We had a lawn contractor flip over, drown somebody in one of the association lakes.
Wow.
We had a board president hit by a car, had to be helivacked out, $80,000 claim. So these things happen all the time. Just because in the 2 or 3 year stint that you've been on the board you haven't seen them doesn't mean you shouldn't be prepared for them and build these things into the contract and work with your advisors on them. So
yeah,
that's a good point.
that's that in any corporation, being short-sighted usually is not a good thing. You have to plan for the long term. And then for example, with the board of directors, when you waive reserves, I've got a board of directors that through its various incarnations over the last 12 years has waived reserves every single year with the membership. Now what's happening? They have $0 in their roof reserves, but they have a $300,000 bill in order to get the roofs done. That's going to be an assessment to 32 units.
Wow.
Now, why did that happen? Because it was short-sighted. They didn't see on the horizon that the roof was going to need to be done, so they waived it every year, so the assessments didn't go up, so that board looked like it was a hero, but now the board 12 years later that's going to have to specially assess, the boards prior to them were not looking out for them or the corporation or the membership. Mm-hmm. So you have to plan in the long term, and that's where contracts like this, where you have a number of people on the property and you have to plan. It sounds a bit macabre, but you have to plan for those types of accidents. Now, how do you do that? Well, you give the contract to your attorney and your experts. You don't necessarily have to think about it, but you have to trust that your experts are, and that's where you have to start, and that's part of your diligence.